Hi, I'm Tony Northrop, and this is a free 1-hour tutorial for the Canon 6D. You probably already know some of the stuff I'm going to cover, so check the description down below. That will show you a table of contents that will allow you to jump forward or back to any particular part that you're interested in. But I assure you, we do have content in here for both the absolute beginners and much more advanced people. There's lots of tips and tricks, as well as recommended accessories like lenses, flashes, tripods, the stuff that we've found to be the very best. If you have a friend with a different camera, send them to this link, sdp.io/tutorials. Here you'll find tutorials like this for just about every modern camera on the market. I'm not going to cover every aspect of the camera, like some things like little post-processing tricks that you can do in camera, but I am going to cover the stuff that I see that's fundamental. So just to warn you, everything that I think that you need to know to take great pictures is going to be in this video though. First, let's talk about the physical parts of the body, and I'm going to kind of assume that you got the lens attached and whatnot. If not, there's a button here on the left. You'll push that in and then twist the lens as such to remove it. Then you'll line up the red dot here with the red dot on the lens body. You'll attach that and then slide it in until it clicks, wiggle it back and forth to make sure it's locked in place. The battery compartment, pretty standard. There's a switch here. You'll pull it towards the center of the camera and then flip the whole thing down. The battery will slide in with the rounded part matching the rounded part of the handle. Make sure you have the contacts, the metal contacts facing into the body. Push those in first. It will click, and then you'll just push that white switch to release the battery. One of the first things you should do is buy a second battery. I always like to have a backup fully charged battery ready. These batteries can last you a couple of days of standard shooting, like on a vacation or something. They'll last a long time, especially if you don't record a lot of video or use live view a lot. But a second battery is pretty necessary because when you run out of batteries, you have to stop shooting, and that gets to be really, really frustrating. So pick up one of these, another LP-E6N battery. I'll warn you to avoid the third-party generic batteries. I would definitely get the Canon battery. You'll find I recommend lots of generic stuff, but I don't do it for batteries. And the reason is we've gone through just about every brand of third-party battery, and they don't last like the Canons do. They'll be great for a couple of months, and then suddenly they will just die when you're in the middle of a shoot. We found that with so many different brands. So while the Canon batteries seem outrageously priced, they are really the best bet if you need a reliable shooter. Use the links down here that you'll see on the slide, like sdp.io/E6N. These sdp.io links give me a few pennies out of every dollar, and it just helps to support these kind of major videos and allows us to do them for free. Let's talk about the different ports on the camera. Over on the left side of the camera here, you'll find a rubber gasket that pops up in two different pieces. This first one provides what they label as an AV out port. And basically that's like the USB port. There's a breakout cable that comes with it that would allow you to hook it up to some, like an old style TV. It's like this really old kind of connector at this point that nobody really uses. So in theory, you could hook that up to an old timey TV and look at your pictures, but you probably wouldn't do that. Below that, you'll see a mini HDMI port. You can use that to connect to something like a more modern TV that uses the HDMI. If you had a mini HDMI to HDMI cable that's not provided, or you could use an HDMI cable to connect to a field monitor if you're going to record video. But this is more of a stills camera than a video camera, so I think not too many of you would actually be doing that. Over on the other part of the rubber gasket here, you'll find two ports. This top one is for a remote shutter trigger. I'll give you a link to remote shutter trigger in just a little bit. This allows you to fire the camera remotely or to set it up on a timer, what's known as an intervalometer, to take pictures on a regular basis for a time lapse. And below that is the microphone jack, so you could hook up an external microphone if you were recording video to get better sound. I'll give you a link to a microphone that I'm using now that I really like. Know that there's no headphone jack on this, so you can't easily monitor the sound. Something to think about if you really care about video. Let's talk about taking and reviewing your picture. So first, you'll turn the camera on with the switch over on the left here. Just flip that over to on. And taking a picture is a two-stage process, as it is with most cameras. You'll push the shutter button halfway down, and the camera will focus. So with its default settings, you could hear that there was a little bit of a beep there, and also the the focusing display, if you have your eye up to the viewfinder, will blink red. Push the shutter all the way down to actually take the picture. At that point, you can review the picture by hitting the play button here. And with the image displayed, you can hit the info button up here to show different information about the picture. So by default, you'll just see the picture. Push it once and it will show you the camera settings, like 1/30th of a second, f4.5. We'll talk about those in a bit. Hit it again, and now you can see your histogram. The histogram tells you about the brightness of the image, and it can tell you if the image is overexposed or underexposed. If you don't know what a histogram is, check chapter 4 in my book, Stunning Digital Photography, and I'll tell you all about it. Hit info again, and now you can see the histogram broken out with red, green, and blue. Sometimes you can use that to tell if your white balance is wrong. If this is over your head, don't sweat it. We'll take it down a notch from here. Normally, the way you'll use this camera is to hold the camera out, the viewfinder up to your eye and look through it. That's an optical viewfinder. Light is literally coming through the lens here, bouncing off of this mirror that you can see on the inside, and then it's going up through here. You can kind of see a prism that kind of flips it around, and then it goes back out to your eye. There's no electronics really involved in that process. It's just a mirror and a prism. And that means that everything happens instantaneously. It also means the camera, when you're using the viewfinder like that, can use its off-sensor phase detection focusing system, which is really fast. Live view is a little bit different. When you hit live view by hitting the start-stop button here, you'll see a video feed on the back of your camera. This is just like using your smartphone, but you'll notice you can no longer use the viewfinder. That's because when live view is enabled, I'll turn it on again here, watch the mirror flip up. So the mirror flips out of the way when you're using live view. That disables the off-sensor phase detection focusing system, meaning focusing is a little bit slower, substantially slower even. And it prevents light from hitting the viewfinder here. So you can't use live view and the viewfinder at the same time. You have to hit this button to switch between them. So with this particular camera, focusing is pretty slow with the back screen. You can see it's going to hunt around a little bit and it'll finally get there. But if you're trying to use that all the time, it's way slower than even your smartphone. So most of the time you're going to want to use this viewfinder. Times when live view is really useful is, well, video. You'll always be using live view for video. It's also useful if you have the camera low to the ground or you're holding it over your head, just anytime the camera might need to be away from your face. While you have live view up, you can also hit the info button to display different information in the live view display. So for landscape photography, live view can be really useful. And one useful thing, if I hit info enough, is I can see the virtual horizon here. See that? It will tell me if the camera's off level. And when it's green like that, I know it's level. So if you're taking a picture of the horizon or the ocean or something where those lines are really important, that's a great way to make sure you have the camera level. If you hit info enough times, you can also see a live view of your histogram there, which is really useful for getting your exposure right before you actually take the picture. Turning live view back off and going back to the viewfinder here, let's talk about the diopter. The diopter is this little dial here, which you can just click up and down like that. And this basically dials in a contact lens or glasses prescription into the viewfinder. So if you're a glasses wearer, you can take off your glasses and hold the viewfinder up to your eye and see everything sharp, as long as your eyesight is within a certain range of capabilities. The diopter is important to know about even if you don't wear glasses, because sometimes that'll get hit accidentally, actually pretty regularly. And when you hold the camera up to your eye, everything's just going to look blurry. And a lot of people think their camera's not focusing, something's broken about their camera, when really all they need to do is to twist this dial to get it right. So the way you set the viewfinder, the diopter, is to hold the camera up to your eye and hit the shutter button so you can see the numbers at the bottom of the display. And then look at those numbers. Don't look through the lens. Look at the numbers at the bottom of the display and twist that diopter until they're as sharp as they're going to get. And then you know it's dialed in. If you have multiple people sharing the same camera, they might need to do that each time you pass it back and forth. Let's talk about the different camera modes. Now, first I'll warn you, when you get the camera, it's probably going to be in this green auto mode. And the green auto mode restricts a lot of what the camera can do. For example, if I hit this quick button here, the little Q button, you can see it only gives me one option, single shooting. That's is changing the shutter. That's the only option I have in Q mode. But if I switch this over to P mode, program mode, and I hit the Q button, suddenly I have a lot more options. The same holds true for the menu system. If I'm telling you need to go to a particular menu and you have it in the green auto mode and you hit the menu button, you won't see the same menu. So that can be a point that can be confusing to people. Now, because we're learning how to properly use the camera, we never have to use the green auto mode. But I still will sometimes switch into the green auto mode if I'm handing the camera to somebody else. You know, when you're like on vacation and you want some stranger to take a picture of you and you have the camera all set up the way you like it and it would be really confusing for them, just switch it over to green. Let it go fully automatic. That's really nice. The P mode here, program mode, basically makes everything automatic about the camera, but doesn't have all the restrictions that the green auto mode does. We don't often use that. What I do use a lot of the time is Aperture Priority mode. And on Canon cameras, Aperture Priority mode is indicated by AV here. So I'm just going to push this lock in the middle. See, there's a lock here in the mode dial. I'm going to push that in and then twist it over to AV, lining up with that little white mark. AV is like aperture value. That's what it actually stands for. The aperture is the iris of the lens. Just like your eye, you know how your pupil will like dilate in bright light and it will open. Wait, dilating is opening up. It'll dilate in dark conditions in low light and it will constrict down into a little small dot when you're out in bright sun. The iris of the lens, the aperture of the lens, works exactly the same way. In an aperture priority mode, you can control how big or closed up it is. We'll look at an example here. Low f-stop numbers like f2 indicate a big opening, and that seems confusing, right? A low number means a big opening. High f-stop numbers like f32 indicate a very small opening. If you look at it, you notice how it says f/32 and f/2. Think of it like a fraction. See how the number's in the denominator? Therefore, the bigger opening is actually a bigger number. That'll make sense to some portion of math nerds out there. But otherwise, you can remember it this way. Low f-stop number means low background sharpness, like f1.8 in that left example there. High f-stop numbers mean high background sharpness, like f22 on this example on the right. These three pictures were taken with an 85mm f1.8 lens. So you wouldn't be able to get these pictures with that sort of background blur with your kit lens, but if you pick up that fantastic Canon 85mm f1.8, you could exactly reproduce that kind of background blur, and Aperture Priority is what would allow you to do that. Aperture helps control the amount of storytelling in the photo. So you can see on the image on the left, the background's very blurred, which draws your attention to Chelsea standing in the foreground. But it doesn't tell you much about where she is. It doesn't give you much context. As I shut the aperture down, shutting down the aperture means using a higher f-stop number. Shutting the aperture down to f8 shows me more of the buildings and cars and people in the background. It just tells more of the overall story. But at the same time, those background details detract from the foreground subject, Chelsea. And at the highest f-stop number, f22, you can see the cars and the people and the buildings are perfectly sharp, telling more of that whole story, but again, competing with the main subject. And you as the photographer get to decide which of those you want, because there's not any one right answer. If you want to know everything about aperture, this is a very high-level overview, visit this link, sdp.io/fstop. I have an intensely detailed video that will teach you everything you need to know. Also, check out Chapter 4 in my photography book, Stunning Digital Photography, which also includes videos. So that's the basics of Aperture Priority. Once you have the camera in AV mode here, you can control the aperture using the main dial. So there's basically two ways you can monitor your current settings. One is to use the LCD screen on the top here, and the other is to hit the info button and see it on the back. I'm going to hit this a couple of times. And I find the LCD screen on top easier to use in the real world, but here in this studio with Justin being my cameraman over here, it's kind of easier to see it on the back of the screen, so I'll probably rely on that more. With this displayed, I'm going to move the main dial here right above the shutter and slide it to the left to select a lower f-stop number, or slide it to the right to select a higher f-stop number. So that's all you do. Aperture Priority, and then this dial here, that changes the value. Now, a closely related mode is Shutter Priority. The shutter is the shutter speed. Your shutter, people think pictures happen in an instant, but they don't. They happen over a period of time. Even 1/60th of a second, like stuff that's very fast, but stuff happens in a 60th of a second. If a car is driving 100 miles an hour and you're up close to it, during that 1/60th of a second, it will cover enough ground that the car will appear blurry if your shutter is open for that long. You'd have to use a fast shutter speed, like 1/2000th of a second, to more completely freeze the motion of that car. But even then, you're not entirely freezing it, you're just freezing it more or less. That's why being able to control your shutter is important. Sometimes you want that blur, like if you're trying to pan the background, and sometimes you want to completely freeze the motion. Here's an example that shows the importance of using shutter priority and controlling the shutter. I'm the photographer and I'm on this merry-go-round facing my daughter. So we're both spinning at the same speed, but the background itself is moving relative to the camera. At a shutter speed of 1/8 of a second, you can see the background is completely panning. It's completely blurred. She's still, because she's moving with me, but the background is sliding to the side. That helps to convey motion in the scene. That's the key part of storytelling. At a higher shutter speed, 1/30th of a second, you can see the background is still moving, but it's not moving as much. At 1/125th of a second, it seems like we're completely stationary, right? The background's moving at the same speed, but you don't see that motion because I've frozen it with a high shutter speed. And again, as a photographer, it's up to you to decide which of those three stories you want to tell, how much blur you want to include. For detailed information about shutter speed, visit this link, sdp.io/settings, where we have another free video that will dig really deep into that topic. For now, I'll just show you how to use shutter priority on your camera. We'll again use the mode dial here. We'll hold down that center lock to unlock it and twist it over to TV. Not like television, it's like timer value, just the way Canon does things. Now that we're in TV mode, let me bring up the display in the back again. I'm going to do the exact same thing I did for shutter priority, which is to move the main dial here. Now you'll see it says TV, and it's showing me the shutter speed, which is at 1/13th of a second. If I scroll it to the left, it gets slower and slower. If I scroll it to the right, it gets faster and faster, all the way to 1/4000th of a second. That's this camera's fastest shutter speed. There are many times when you'll want to go to a slow shutter speed, like even 1 full second. You can see as we scroll to the left, instead of showing it as a fraction, it's showing it as a 1 with quote marks. You'll see the same thing on the LCD panel up here. Those quote marks mean it's a full second or some multiple of that. I can go all the way up to 30 seconds, and you can't go past that. 30 seconds is useful for taking pictures of, say, star trails or pictures at night in completely rural environments, maybe even without a moon. So there are times when you need a 30-second shutter speed to gather enough light to properly expose your picture, and that's one of those times you'd want to use that. Why not just always use 1/4000th of a second and always freeze action to always get sharp shots? The reason is that that doesn't give your camera very much light because the shutter's not open for long, so it can't gather that much light, and as a result, the camera will produce very noisy images. It will have to use a very high ISO that we'll talk about in just a little bit. In general, you want to use the slowest shutter speed you can that doesn't cause motion blur or camera shake. And again, this is discussed more at sdp.io/settings. Let's go on and talk about manual mode. That big goal that everybody wants to get to, like everybody thinks manual mode means you're a pro, but I'll let you in on a secret. Pros don't usually use manual mode. I'll use manual mode when I'm shooting in a studio with studio lights. I'll use it for night photography and a few other specialized situations, but for the most part, I'm either in aperture priority or shutter priority. And the reason for that is that I like to use the camera's auto exposure system because the camera can instantly adapt to changing lighting conditions, like the sun moving behind clouds, like somebody stepping from in front of a light to behind the light in an indoor environment. That can just drastically change your exposure. The camera can make those decisions instantaneously, whereas if I'm relying on myself to manually change the settings, it can take me a little bit. Anyway, for those who do want to use manual mode, I have a whole video that makes it really easy to figure out your settings, and it's free. Go to sdp.io/go manual. To use manual mode on the Canon 6D, again, we're going to the mode dial here, I'll depress that center locking button and twist it over to M. M is for manual. Now, let's bring up the display here. Now when I move the main dial, you can see it's changing the shutter speed. If I want to change the aperture, I'll use the secondary dial here. So now you're working your index finger next to the shutter and your thumb on the secondary dial to dial in both the shutter speed and the aperture. Now, I'll give you a secret. Manual mode doesn't mean you're controlling all the settings, because there is one more setting, and that's ISO, the camera sensitivity. The ISO can be set automatically, and then, even in manual mode, you will be able to use auto exposure. So that's useful in a lot of situations where you want the camera to pick the exposure, but you want to control both the shutter speed and the aperture. We'll get to ISO in just a second. If you're interested in different types of photography, I'm going to give you some links to other videos that will allow you to dig deeper. Because I know this is a long video, but there's a lot to photography. Like, you could spend hundreds of hours learning about photography, and you should. It's fun. If you're interested in night photography, taking pictures in the dark, go to sdp.io/np. If you're interested in landscape photography, visit sdp.io/ls. These are all free videos. Wildlife photography, sdp.io/wl. And now let's talk about bulb mode. Bulb mode keeps the shutter open for some period of time longer than 30 seconds, because manual mode only lets us go to 30 seconds. If you want to use bulb mode, you'll push this lock in the middle of the mode dial here and switch it over to B. And what bulb mode does is it keeps the shutter open for as long as I have the shutter held down. So I'll hold it down here, and you can see it on the little LCD screen. See that seconds counter counting up? 5, 6, 7, 8. That's how long the shutter has been open. So I can release it at any time, and that will end the exposure. Now, if you look at my picture, it's just completely white. And the reason for that is I did like a 9-second exposure in a bright environment. So I wildly overexposed the picture. You just wouldn't have any need to do that in a bright environment. You would do it during night photography. It's not uncommon to take pictures of star trails that are 10 or 20 minutes long. And there are a couple of different ways to do that. But if you want to use bulb mode, anyway, that's how you would do it. But you probably don't want to stand there with your finger on the shutter for 30 minutes, right? Because you get bored and you'd probably shake the camera around. So the way you would do that is you would use a remote shutter timer. You connect that timer into this port here, and then you would set it up to keep the shutter open for 30 minutes or however long. Or you could just lock the shutter open, look at your watch, and come back when you were done and stop it. And I'll give you a link to a remote shutter timer near the end of this video when we talk about accessories. For now, I want to plug my books. I have 4 books that you might be interested in. The first is Stunning Digital Photography, which teaches you the art and science of photography. What I'm doing now is teaching you the buttons and dials on your specific camera, and that will get you to get pictures that are not over or underexposed, but it's the most basic part of photography. Things like mood and storytelling, lighting, expression, posing, planning, these are what make a great picture, not the buttons and dials on your camera. If you only learn the buttons and dials on your camera, it's like teaching somebody to drive by just telling them what the steering wheel and gas pedal do. Obviously, they're not going to do a great job in negotiating a traffic circle if that's all they know. That's what my book does. It teaches you the intricacies of getting stunning photography. Check it out at Amazon or visit our link here, sdp.io/store. You can go to Amazon and search for Tony Northrup or Stunning Digital Photography, and you can see other users' reviews. You'll see that it has well over 1,000 reviews with an average of a 5-star rating. People really like it. It also includes now 14 hours of video. So it's not just a book, but you can read a section and then watch a short video clip about it. And then at the end of every chapter, there are hands-on practices and quizzes that help reinforce what you've learned. So I make it fun. And if you don't like the book, I'll give you your money back. If you're more of a social learner, like you learn by interacting with people, asking questions, it includes access to a private Facebook group with over 20,000 people who are also in the process of learning photography. So you'll get that built in for $10, literally, or the paperbacks are $20. If you get into post-processing using applications Lightroom and Photoshop are pretty much the most popular ways to edit your photos and organize your photos. And I have books about both of those in case you're interested at the same link. I also have a book dedicated to camera gear. Things like which lens should I use? What are all these things about the lens? Like what is focus breathing? And why would I want a lens that's f1.8 as opposed to a lens that's f5.6? Things like studio lighting. There's an intense amount of detail about tripods and just about any other type of gear you can imagine in my photography buying guide. You can buy them independently at Amazon in ebook or paperback form, or if you visit sdp.io/store, you can get a bundle that has all the books included. Thanks for checking that out. We'll get back to the lesson now, talking about shutter modes. By default, the camera will come configured to shoot in single shot mode. Moving this back into Aperture Priority. And in single shot mode, when I push the shutter down, it's going to take one picture. Even if I hold the shutter down, it's only going to take one picture. I highly recommend any picture you care about at all, taking just a couple of shots, because so many things can change from one exposure to the next. Like if you're taking a portrait of somebody, have you ever had a shot where somebody's eyes are closed during the portrait? Just rattle off 2 or 3 shots, and with digital, you can easily delete 2 of them and just pick the very best one. So the easiest way to do that is to set it to continuous shutter so that it will automatically fire off multiple shots when you hold it down. Now, there's a button dedicated to this. On the top of the camera, you'll see this button Drive. So if I push that, now I can move the main dial here and iterate between all the different shutter drive modes. That's kind of small to see, so let's use this display on the back here. You can see just by pushing this Drive button, I can now switch between single shooting, continuous shooting, single silent shooting. It's not at all silent, it's just slightly quieter. Continuous silent shooting, and then 2 different timer modes. So for now, let's select continuous shooting, and I'll just half push the shutter to select that. So now when I take pictures, it just keeps shooting, right? Of course, that's what you want for sports and wildlife in action, but like I said, I pretty much always take multiple pictures, even if it's a landscape shot, just because sometimes one shot will be shaky and the second shot will be sharp, and it doesn't cost you anything, right? So let's just demonstrate what single continuous or silent shooting does. All right, you can hear it, right? Silent is just a bull-faced lie, but it's quieter. It's better if you're shooting in a wedding and you're in a chapel and you're trying not to disturb everything. I would definitely choose that silent mode because it's slightly less disturbing. For the most part, I will just leave this in continuous shooting mode and just shoot everything like that. Let's talk about the 2 different self-timer modes. Oh, before I do that, I want to show you a trick. The Q button here is so useful. If you forget where all these buttons are, just hit that Q button, because it will allow you to just kind of walk through every possible setting and change anything without remembering where all the stupid buttons are. It's great to know those buttons because they allow you to quickly change things, which if you're shooting a wedding or something, like you often have to change stuff instantaneously. Maybe you don't want to go browsing through the menu, but when you're learning, the Q button is really useful. So I can select that and then, for example, scroll over to continuous shooting to change the different modes. Let's use that to select the self-timers. So I'll select that and then I'll scroll over to either self-timer 10 seconds or self-timer 2 seconds. What these do is they delay the shutter by either 10 seconds or 2 seconds. So I'll set it to 2 seconds and I'll point at the camera and you can see the red light, there's beeping, and it's beeping and warning me that it's about to take a picture. You'll use the 10-second timer when you want to do that thing where you put the camera on a tripod and you take a picture of your family, but you want to be in the picture, and so you run around tripod and you put your arm around your, that's what the 10-second timer is for. The 2-second timer is great for night photography and macro photography when you're on a tripod, because even if you have the camera on a tripod, when you push the shutter button, it's going to shake the camera just a little bit. So that 2-second timer eliminates that camera shake and just makes everything a little bit sharper. When you're done using one of the self-timers, don't forget to hit that Drive button again and go back into continuous shooting, because I always forget, and then next time I'll eagerly be trying to catch some moment and I'll push the shutter and then it's waiting 10 seconds. Let's talk about the different focusing modes. This camera has 3 different focusing modes, and by default, it comes in a mode where the camera is going to guess whether it's a still subject or a moving subject, and that's okay. But you know how to use the camera now, so you can tell the camera whether to focus on a still subject or try to track a moving subject. To do that, you can do it 2 ways. There's the AF button here. That's the fastest way to do that. Push that and then move the main dial. And you can see on the LCD screen here, it shows 1 shot, AI focus, or AI servo. 1 shot focuses on a still subject. Once it gets focus, it stops trying to focus. It's more precise. AI servo will follow a moving subject. So the camera will get initial focus, and then it keeps trying to refocus. So obviously, if you're photographing your kid playing soccer or your dog running down the beach, that's what you want. If you were using 1 shot, it would focus on wherever the dog was, and then by the time you push the shutter all the way, the dog would be in a different spot and your picture would be blurry. AI servo is better for tracking moving subjects like that. The AI focus is probably the default. I don't ever recommend people use that. That is just the camera making that decision for you. The AI stands for artificial intelligence, and it's not really that. It's not like the movie AI. It's not that smart. If you want to know more about different focusing modes, visit this link, sdp.io/focus. There's a free video that just goes into more detail. Let's talk about the different focusing areas. Now, this is relevant when you're using the viewfinder here. I'm just going to put that over into AI or to 1-shot mode. As I hold the camera up to my eye, I can see that it has 11 focusing points. And by default, it's going to focus on any of them. You can't tell the camera to focus on all things. It can only focus on one thing. So if the camera, whatever point it gets into focus first is pretty much where it's going to focus. And that's fine for a default, but that means you're going to get a lot of shots that are out of focus. Like if you're trying to take a picture, make a portrait, you want to be focusing on the nearest eye. But this camera will just focus on the brim of their hat or their forehead or their nose, all of which will make the eye noticeably out of focus. In those scenarios, you want to choose a single focusing point. In fact, in almost every scenario, you should be choosing a single focusing point. The way you'll do that is by pushing this button on the back. It looks like it has a little kind of grid there. Those are your focusing points. So you push that, and now you can see in the back it's saying automatic selection, where the camera picks it. I'll move the main dial here to switch over to manual selection. And you can see as I'm scrolling that, it's actually changing it for me. Now that I've selected manual selection, I can use the directional pad here to select different focusing points. And I'll tell you, my favorite focusing point is this top one here, because in a portrait, you usually want the eyes to be in the upper third, or it will be one of these corner ones here, just because you rarely want your subject to be dead center in the middle of the frame. Now, that middle focusing point is usually the fastest and best, so these outside focusing points might not be quite as fast and accurate, but your best bet is usually to put the focusing point as close to your subject as possible. Now, the focusing points are kind of clustered around the middle of the frame on this particular camera. You can overcome that and focus anywhere in the frame by using a technique called focus and recompose. I cover focus and recompose in chapter 4 of Stunning Digital Photography, so check that out. Now let's talk about changing the ISO. The ISO is the camera's sensitivity, and a lot of people will say ISO, but I've done a lot of research into this. It's actually not an acronym. It's just ISO. It's their name of the organization that made it up. If you want detailed information about ISO, watch this free video at the link sdp.io/ISO. I will show you how to change the ISO. There's an ISO button here, conveniently enough. So you push that, and then if you scroll all the way to the left, you'll see it's auto ISO. And that means the camera's going to decide the ISO for you. That's fine. Until you perfectly understand the effect of ISO, just leave it on auto ISO. Once you get to the point where you want to learn about ISO and you take control of it, you'll hit that ISO button and then scroll to the right a little bit. ISO 100 here, the lowest ISO, is the camera's base ISO. That's going to produce pictures that are just perfectly clean and have almost no noise in them whatsoever. But that means that the camera needs a lot of light to properly expose a picture. So ISO 100 is going to be perfect for taking pictures outdoors. Now, if you learned photography in the film era, you might remember going to the pharmacy and getting either like ISO or ASA 100 film or 400 film for mixed light, like cloudy days, or ISO 1600 film for shooting indoors. It's exactly the same system. ISO 100 is good for outside and sunny, or you can go up higher and higher, and you can go all the way up to ISO 25600, which should allow you to get reasonably sharp pictures, even in like a dim bar or a nightclub or something. But when you take pictures at ISO 25600, the images are going to be very, very noisy. So there's that trade-off. That's why you always try to use the lowest ISO that you can, where it will still give you a properly exposed picture. But even as a pro, I'm almost always using auto ISO because it doesn't, if it's a little bit off, that's generally okay. It's not a huge problem, especially if you shoot RAW, which I'll show you about in just a little bit. Let's talk about exposure compensation. Now, I just talked about aperture and shutter priority and ISO and all that, and that's good to know. But the most important thing to know is actually exposure compensation. If you get pictures that are too bright or too dark, you should be thinking about exposure compensation and not first about aperture or shutter priority or ISO. If using any sort of auto exposure mode, even manual mode with auto ISO or aperture priority or shutter priority, exposure compensation is the answer to how do I make my pictures darker or brighter. It's really easy on this particular camera. I'm in aperture priority now, and let's turn on live view so we can see the results in real time. As we're looking at this screen, we can see the screen, it should be white, but it's kind of dingy and gray, right? So the way we'd make that bright is by adjusting the exposure compensation. So I'm going to use this secondary dial here to change the exposure compensation. And you can see right at the bottom of the display, it shows 3, 2, 1, mark, 1, 2, 3. That's how many stops of exposure compensation I have currently dialed in. Each stop is a doubling or a halving of the light. So if I scroll this thumb dial here, 3 ticks to the right, it's now at 1. And notice the screen got brighter. That means the camera is now gathering twice as much light. If I do 3 more ticks to the right, the screen got even brighter, and now this white is almost white. You can see the effect on the histogram there. Now I'm gathering 4 times more light than I was when it was in the middle. I can go all the way up to plus 3 stops, and now you can see it's actually a little too bright. If my picture were too bright, I could go down to -1 and make it darker, -2, -3. You can see it's almost completely black. Exposure compensation, really important to understand. That was just an intro to it. For an in-depth study on how to use exposure compensation, visit sdp.io/EC for a free video. Now let's talk about bracketing. You know how we use exposure compensation to adjust the brightness up or down a little bit? Bracketing kind of does that automatically. So it can take 3 pictures, one that's underexposed, one that's properly exposed, and one that's overexposed. And then you can pick the one that you like the best later. That way you never have to miss the exposure. In the film days, photographers did that to make sure that they had at least one shot that was good. But in the modern era, you do that because you want to extend the dynamic range of your pictures to reduce noise and get cleaner shadows. Just basically cleaner images in general. Here's how you turn on bracketing. It's pretty easy. I'll hit the Q button here, and then I'll scroll up to this exposure compensation setting here, and I'll click Set. And now what I'll do is I'll use the secondary dial here to adjust the overall exposure compensation. For now, I'll just leave it at 0, that's fine. And then I'll use the main dial to adjust the auto exposure bracketing. And you can see as I slide that to the right, it's adjusting the interval between the different bracketed shots. So 3 ticks out, I'm at ±1 stop exposure bracketing, and 6 ticks out, I'm at ±2 stops of exposure compensation and bracketing. So I find that to be a pretty good general compromise. If you need even more dynamic range, you can go out to ±3, but ±2 is a good kind of sweet spot. So now you can see on the back display that it's showing little ticks for -2 stops, 0, and +2 stops. And when I take pictures I held the shutter down for 3 separate pictures. As I review those 3 pictures, you can see one's properly exposed, one's underexposed, and one's overexposed. Those are ready to be blended together into a single HDR picture. That's all there is to bracketing. When you're done, make sure you go in and turn it off. Otherwise, you'll end up kind of frustrated because you'll need to just take like one properly exposed picture, and your pictures will be continuously properly exposed and then underexposed and then overexposed. Let's talk about Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is wireless networking that will transfer pictures from your camera to your smartphone. If you're on vacation and you took some great pictures of your kids or your whatever monument you were at and you want to put them on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, that's how you would do it. It transfers it just like using your home network. And the way you're going to do it is you're going to first pull out your smartphone and get Canon's Wi-Fi app installed. The icon looks like that. So it's available for both iOS and Android. So you'll just go into your app store and search for the Canon Wi-Fi app. It's called Canon Camera Connect. And see, they pop up some other stuff. It's an ad there. That's kind of deceiving. You don't want to click that first thing. Look for that icon there, and I'll click Get, and I'll install it. And while that's installing, I'll go onto my camera here and turn on Wi-Fi, because Wi-Fi is not on by default, because Wi-Fi would eat more batteries than necessary. So you have to go in and manually turn it on every time you want to use it. So I'll hit the menu button here to pull up the menu system. And I will scroll over. I'll use the directional pad here to navigate the menu system. I'll scroll all the way over to the right here to this third wrench icon, and then I'll scroll down to Wi-Fi. Currently says disable, so I'll click set, and I'll switch that over to enable. And if I can go down to Wi-Fi function here to investigate this a little bit further, this will allow me to set a nickname for the camera. So I could just call this the 6D, because after all, you probably don't have more than one 6D, right? To register the name, you'll have to hit the Q button to switch between the display and the actual keyboard. It's really clumsy. They really need like a touch screen for this. Okay, 6D. And then you can see I can hit the menu here to say OK. And now the Wi-Fi function screen comes up, and this allows me to choose what I'm going to do with the Wi-Fi. I have to tell it, are you connecting to a PC or transferring pictures to another camera? I don't know why you would do that. You can see they have upload to a web service. It's terrible. Canon's web service thing, it never really panned out. Instead, you're just going to connect to your smartphone, and I'll click set there. And now you can see I can choose between the camera access point mode or the infrastructure mode. The camera access point mode is generally the right one to select. So I'll select that, and then I'll click OK. And then you want the easy connection. Forget the manual connection. OK. OK. Now the camera's ready to receive connections. It's telling you the SID, which is 6D. That's whatever you set. And then the encryption key. So you'll need to connect to your phone and type that in. So back on my phone. The app is now installed, but I don't want to open it yet. Instead, I want to go into my Wi-Fi settings. On an Android phone, you can just hold down that little Wi-Fi icon, and it will pop up a list of networks to connect to. You can see one of the networks is 6D, so I'll select that. And now I need to type in that numeric password. Join. You only should have to type the password the first time, so it's not that bad. Now, you should know that when you connect to the Wi-Fi here, your phone will no longer get to the internet. So you connect to the camera to transfer pictures to your phone, but then you have to disconnect when you actually want to share the pictures to Instagram or something. So now that it's connected to my camera, I can actually fire up that Camera Connect app. I'll allow it to send me notifications. Okay. Okay, new camera found. Select the camera to connect to, obviously just that one camera. Okay, now on the camera itself, you can see it's prompting me to select what viewable images I want to allow. And I'm just going to allow it to view all of them by clicking OK. Okay, great. And so now my phone and the camera are talking. If I want to transfer pictures to my phone to share them, I'm going to select Images on Camera here. And now you can see all these just beautiful pictures that I've taken of the studio. I'm a better photographer than those people. Here, look, this picture has my cameraman Justin in there, so I can zoom in there. There's Justin. And now that I've previewed it, I decide, oh, this one definitely needs to go on Insta. So I can browse through the pictures here and decide which ones I want. And I can even like add ratings to them, which if you later import your pictures into Lightroom, that rating would come through because it's telling the camera that those are good pictures. Now when I want to get pictures to me, I'm going to push this button here. That's the little like camera transfer thing. And now I can select the pictures now that I'm in that mode. So let's say I like these 3 lovely pictures. I'm going to click Save here, and that will transfer them to my phone. So now it's prompting me, is it okay to connect your photos? Because this one is going to save them in my actual library. Okay, so I've got that. Another way to transfer a picture quickly is to select it and then just hit this transfer icon here. You can see it will download it in. So now they're just on my phone in my picture gallery. So I can go into Insta and there you go. I can see the pictures here. Oh, there's Justin. Yeah, he's definitely going to want that on Insta. And click Next. So great. Now it's ready for sharing. You have the full resolution version of it. No problem. When you're done, be sure you go back and turn off Wi-Fi because it burns up a lot of batteries. So when you're done with it, and also it stops your phone from getting to the internet. So I'll turn off Disable here, and Wi-Fi is now off. You can see on the LCD display whether Wi-Fi is turned on or off. Let's talk about the GPS. This camera also has global positioning system where it talks to a big network of satellites to pinpoint its exact location on the planet. Amazing, right? It actually is really cool. When you import your pictures, when you've had GPS turned on and you import your pictures into something like Lightroom, you can go into the Maps module in Lightroom and see all your pictures scattered across a picture of the globe. It's so cool when you travel around with GPS mode enabled. It also means that if you're like, oh, I want to find that picture that I took at Glacier National Park, rather than having to sort through by date or camera model or something in Lightroom, it means you can just scroll to Glacier National Park in the map and browse through and find that exact picture. Every camera should have GPS, but it's not on by default, again, because it burns some extra batteries. So to turn it on, I'm going to hit the menu button here, and then I'm going to scroll over to this second wrench icon here. And then I'll scroll down to GPS, I'll hit Set, and you can see Select GPS Device Disable. I'm going to turn on the internal GPS. And that should be about it. Now, if I go back and select Setup right below that, there's another option I can turn on, which is Auto Time Setting. That's really useful, Auto Update. Because the clocks in these cameras won't automatically change time zones when you travel. But if you have the GPS turned on and you have auto time setting turned on, then it can actually do that, which is so great. Position update timing. This allows you to select how frequently it's checking your location. If you select a high interval, like every 5 minutes, it's going to use a lot less battery than if you check every second. So by default, it's checking every 15 seconds, but I bet you don't move far enough in every 15 seconds for that to matter. So for me, I can usually do every minute or every 2 minutes. And then even if I'm walking around a city, it's probably going to be pretty accurate. Let's do every minute. And that will reduce the amount of batteries consumed. You don't necessarily have to use that when you're shooting around the house, but you will be so glad you had it turned on when you're traveling. If you checked GPS information display, it'll just show you the information that the camera has about your current location. I'm underground here, so it's not seeing any satellites. And then GPS logger will actually log your data to something, but you don't really need that. Instead, what you really want is just that it's tagging your photos with the GPS data. So have fun with that. And don't forget to carry an extra battery because it will burn through some batteries. Let's talk about RAW versus JPEG. Your camera can write pictures in one of 2 different formats. JPEG is the most popular picture format on the internet. It's the way most pictures are shared. It's good for sharing pictures because it's heavily compressed. So a picture that might be 6 megabytes could be shrunk down to like 1/10 that size, even less, because it'll say, take a big part of the blue sky and just say, hey, this whole area is blue, instead of describing each and every pixel as being some shade of blue. It removes all that redundant information, but it also throws out a lot of useful information, like details about the brightest and darkest parts of your picture. It just throws it out and makes those things completely black or completely white. The other option is to shoot RAW format. On this camera, those RAW files have a CR2 extension instead of a JPG extension. The RAW files don't throw out any data, and as a result, they're very large. They're also a little bit slower to write to the card, but they contain much more information in the highlights and shadows of the image, and therefore, if you go back and you edit your pictures later, you can produce much better looking pictures. It also means that if you accidentally over or underexpose your image, you can rescue it later. And we all accidentally over or underexpose something, and RAW, being able to fix that in post is so useful. If you want detailed information about why you should be shooting RAW, if I haven't convinced you, visit this link, sdp.io/rawvjpeg. For now, I'm going to show you how to turn it on in this camera. I'll hit the menu button here, and I'm going to go all the way over to that first camera icon and the very first menu item. Why is the very first menu item? Because it's really important to change. So instead of selecting JPEG large, I'm going to use the secondary dial here to turn off JPEG pictures and the main dial here to select RAW. So now you can see I'm shooting RAW images and no JPEG pictures. I do have the option of shooting both JPEG and RAW. Now, the downside to RAW, besides larger files, is that you must use some sort of app to process your pictures. Almost everybody will use Adobe Lightroom to import your pictures. You'll just put your memory card in your computer. Adobe will read everything in. It'll look at your RAW files and display them for you. Then when you get ready to share, it will convert your RAW file with any editing that you've done and save it as a shareable JPEG file. That's pretty much how everybody does it. If you aren't sure that you want to get into that whole RAW editing thing, then what I suggest you do is enable both RAW and JPEG like that. That way, you can still work with the JPEG files, but you have the RAW files in case you want them in the future. Because maybe you take a great picture of your kid now and it doesn't turn out right and you don't know how to edit now, but a year from now you might be great at RAW editing and you'll wish you had it. If you capture RAW now, you don't have to use the file, but at least you have it. So that's why you might want to take pictures in both JPEG and RAW format. Let's talk about the metering modes. Metering is the process the camera uses to determine how dark or bright the image should be. And good news, you never have to think about it. Because metering was something that was really important in the film era, because you had to wait a couple of days before your film was developed and you wouldn't know on the spot if your picture was over or underexposed. Nowadays, you can pretty much just see right away if your picture is over or underexposed and then use exposure compensation, as I described earlier, to fix it. If you know what spot metering is and you want to change it, I'll show you how to do that. I'll turn the camera on and then see this button here? It looks like a little eye. I'm going to push that. And now I can select between one of 4 different metering modes. You pretty much always want to use evaluated metering. That's the default. If you're unsure, just go back to that. But if you know you want to use spot metering, you can select it here. Spot metering just tells the camera to base the entire frame's exposure on one small part of the image. It's not that useful. Old school people love to use it. This camera does not have a built-in flash. If you want to use a flash, you have to buy an external flash. I'll recommend one at the end of this video. It will slide right here into the hot shoe. One thing I want to point out is it'll pretty much automatically fire once you get it connected, but you do have the option of changing the flash exposure compensation to control how much light that flash puts out. And to do that, I hit the Q button here, and then I'll scroll up to the flash exposure compensation. Just wanted to show you where that is. And now I can use the main dial to adjust the output down or up. And I find that flash almost always puts out too much light. And that's why so many flash pictures are a little washed out and people are like squinting and a little bit blind. So by default, I'll dial flash exposure compensation in at -1 1/3 stop. That's what I just did there. There's a lot to flash. And if you check chapter 3 of my book, Stunning Digital Photography, I'll teach you lots of things about flash, like using flash diffusers and using bounce flash. I just kind of wanted to show you how to do it on this actual camera. Another feature you might never have to worry about is white balance. You see, different types of light sources have very slightly different colors. And in the photography community, we've decided the right white balance is sunlight. I guess it is the biggest source of light in the solar system, right? So we call that daylight balanced, and your flash is daylight balanced, and these studio lights that I have around me are daylight balanced. But if you have incandescent bulbs or LED bulbs, the incandescent bulbs are probably a little bit warm, a little bit yellow, and the LED bulbs are probably a little bit blue. And if you took pictures in those environments without any sort of white balance setting, then your pictures would be a little bit yellow or blue. And that's why sometimes you'll have pictures that just have a weird tint to them. White balance can fix that, but again, you probably don't have to worry about it because the camera has auto white balance built into it. So the camera will look at the environment and think, oh, okay, they're using like yellow light. I'll just fix that so the pictures don't look yellow. It's pretty smart about it. Where it can run into problems is, say, especially during night photography, you might have 5 different light sources and the camera can't adjust to them all, right? Or you could be taking pictures of somebody inside with an outside window behind them, and that mix between the incandescent bulbs inside and the sunlight outside, again, it has to pick one white balance. It can't fix both of those at the same time. So there are times when you might decide you want to change the white balance manually. The reason I told you didn't have to worry about it is you can edit that in Lightroom or any post-processing app on your computer. So rather than thinking about it at the time I'm taking the picture, I'd rather focus on the more important aspects of photography, like the storytelling and the mood and the pose. And then later when I get back to my computer and I have plenty of time, there's no hurry, I can easily fix the white balance if it needs it, but it rarely needs it. If you decide you want to change it on your camera, I'm just going to show you how to do this. I will just hit the Q button here and I'll scroll over to this setting here. You can see right now it says AWB, that's auto white balance. And then I'll move the main dial. And then you just pick the picture that matches the light source. So the house, that's shade. It says at the bottom, daylight, cloudy, tungsten light, whatever. But then when you're done, go back and set it back to auto white balance, because the worst thing is to change it to shade and then you keep shooting and you forget and every one of your pictures ends up being all orange. Let's talk about recording video with this camera. Video works much like live view mode, except the little switch up here that you use for live view, you're going to switch it from the camera to the video camera. Boop. And now you can see, you might have to hit that stop button, but you can see that it's showing me a video feed here. And otherwise it's basically exactly like using live view. I can hit the info button to iterate between different sets of information. And when I'm ready to record, I'll hit start, stop. And you can see now it's actually recording. You pretty much want to nail focus before you start recording, because if you try to focus while you're recording with this camera, it's really not smooth at all. I'll hit the AF on button and it will focus. You can see the picture got darker and it took a really long time to focus. So think about the poor souls who have to watch your video later. Like watching that sort of focusing thing is really unpleasant. Your smartphone probably does a much better job of focusing during video than this camera does. So focus before you start recording. And if you do need to focus while recording, you might just use manual focus on your camera's lens. It'll probably look a lot better than trying to use that sort of focus tracking that's built into this. There are a few options you should know about for video. I'll hit the menu button here. And if I scroll over a couple, you can see there's a set of menus that have the little video camera icon there. There are a couple of options here for how it's autofocusing, but none of them are going to be great for you. The options that you really want to know about are the movie recording size. You can see by default it's set to 1920. That's 1920 is what everybody calls 1080p now, and then 30 frames a second. So I'll select that, and you can see that that's pretty much the best I can do. The difference between IPB and All-I is the codec that it's using to write the file. All-I is supposed to be a little bit better for editing, but the video files themselves are much larger. And I'll say, I've never had any problem using IPB for editing. So you can edit either one of them. All is just like, it's slightly different, but IPB seems fine. I've never noticed any big difference between it. You can also change the frame rate to go down to 24 frames a second, or you have the option here for doing, it says 1280. They mean 720p at 60 frames a second, if you decide you want to do 60 frames a second. So the default is probably fine. The other thing you should know about is the sound recording mode. By default, it's set to auto. And that's fine if you're just like run and gun, just recording a little video clip. But if you're actually trying to get somebody talking like me, what happens with auto is whenever I stop talking, it will hear silence. And then in the quiet moments, it decides it needs to crank the volume up. So whenever the person stops talking, you'll just hear like the background noise go way up, and then they start talking and the volume drops again, and auto sounds terrible. So in most situations, you're going to switch sound recording from auto to manual. And now with it set to manual, I can select record level and move it up or down. Where you want the levels is not clipping. Like here, it's hitting those red dots. So I need to go back it off a little bit and go down here so that it's just edging into the yellow, but never hitting the red. That's important whether you're using the on-camera microphone or you've hooked up an external microphone. If you read my book, Stunning Digital Photography, you'll see that I'll talk about using an interval timer either to make time lapses or star trails. This camera does not have an interval timer built into it like a lot of cameras do, so instead you'll have to use the external shutter release that I'll show you in just 1 second. That second is now. This is the external shutter release that I recommend. You can visit this link, sdp.io/60timer to pick it up. Canon will sell you one, and they will charge you like 40, 50 bucks or something. This is 15 bucks. Have these for a bunch of different cameras. They're made by some, I don't know, some Chinese manufacturer, and they're resold under different brands. They take 2 AAA batteries that seem to last like 2 years. The batteries last forever, and it works great. So you don't need anything more. It's cheap. It's 15 bucks there. I saved you like 40 bucks. Spend it on books. Why not? Let's talk about mirror lockup. One of the techniques I discuss in Stunning Digital Photography is using mirror lockup to get sharper pictures when you have the camera on a tripod. It doesn't do anything useful for you handheld. You can turn on mirror lockup in the menu here, but for the most part, I would just recommend using live view. As I showed you earlier, turning on live view flips the mirror out of the way. That's all I wanted to recommend. Just instead of using mirror lockup, just turn on live view. It makes it easier when you're on a tripod anyway. Your memory card is your digital film. It's this little card here, and at some point, you're going to fill it up. At that point, you should put your memory card into your computer, offload all your pictures, then back those pictures up somewhere else in case your computer fails or is stolen or something, you don't lose all your pictures. I'll show you how to format your memory card now. Hit the menu button, and then you're going to go all the way over to the right to that first wrench icon, and then the last item on that page is Format Card. So I'll select Set, and then I need to select OK, and now it's formatting the picture. Notice that it didn't give me like a second warning. It just went ahead and formatted it without that additional layer of protection. What if I had a whole bunch of important pictures on there? I'd be like, oh my God, I just deleted my whole vacation. It's not too late. There's a free tool you can use to recover your pictures from your memory card. It's also good if your hard drive crashes or something. It's called PhotoRec. Visit sdp.io/PhotoRec to find that free tool. It's available for Windows, Mac, Linux, just about anything. If you search photo recovery, you'll find a bunch of tools that want to charge you 50 or 100 bucks to do the same thing. They're pretty much just selling you this same free tool. So visit that link there. I saved you another 50 or 100 bucks. My least favorite thing about cameras is the beeping. I hate it because, well, sometimes I do wedding photography and everybody's camera will be beeping by default. So you have Uncle Bob in the pews and his camera's always just like beep, 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 because he's trying to take pictures. Oh, it drives me nuts. So I always ask people to just turn the beep off. You still have visual confirmation in the viewfinder when you focus. You don't need the camera to beep. It's super annoying to other humans. So to turn the beep off, go all the way over to this first camera icon. It's the second option down. That's how important it is. They made it the very second option. And select disable. Now it's silent. Much more discreet too. Good for street photography. Back button focus. By default, the camera focuses when you push the shutter button halfway and then takes a picture when you push it all the way. That's okay. That's the way all cameras work by default. Everybody's kind of accustomed to that. But as you get serious about photography, you'll find that it has some serious weaknesses. For one, if you're doing night photography, sometimes it can be really hard to focus in low light conditions. And when you finally do get focus, you want to take several pictures of that environment. Every time you go to take the picture, the camera will try to refocus and ruin your focusing. Another situation where you want to use back button focusing is something like when you want to do focus and recompose, but you also want to have the camera in continuous focusing mode, AFC, or AI servo rather. That allows you to use AI servo with focus and recompose. If you want detailed information about why you should use back button focus, just about every pro in the world uses back button focus. Visit this link, sdp.io/YBB. I'm done trying to sell you on it. I'm just going to show you how to configure it in case you do want to use it. The easiest way to do that is to hit the Q button here and then scroll down over to this option, Custom Controls, and then I'll hit Set. This just takes you to this menu thing. So you can see the first one here shows the shutter button. I'll select that, and instead of having it be AF, I'm just going to have it do metering start, and I'll hit Set. And now what I've done is the camera no longer focuses when I have to press the shutter. I've decoupled focusing from the shutter. So now I can now take pictures without refocusing. The other key part of this is to use the AF on button. So it's enabled by default. You don't have to do anything for that. You just have to turn off focusing on the shutter button. So now to use back button focusing, I'm going to use both my thumb on the AF on button and my index finger on the shutter button. Whenever I want to focus, I'll hold down the AF on button until it focuses, and then I'll use the shutter to take the picture. This will seem uncomfortable at first because you're used to just using your shutter button, and now you need to coordinate your thumb and your forefinger. But once you get used to it, I promise you'll never want to go back. One last thing about the camera is My Menu. The menu system is incredibly complex, and the quick menu helps, but sometimes you'll be trying to remember where that menu item is to format your memory card, and you'll be like, there's like 17 menus here, how can I find it? You can take the most frequently used menu items and stick them on a single menu called My Menu. That way, whatever you're looking for, it's probably under My Menu. To create My Menu, I'm going to hit the menu button here, and I'm going to go to the last menu item, which is a star. See My Menu settings? I'll select that, and then Register to My Menu adds a menu from some other menu into this custom My Menu thing. And now you can see I can scroll through all these different options. Like let's say I did like mirror lockup. I would select that and click OK. And I'll hit menu to go back. So now when I go to My Menu, you can see mirror lockup is an option here. It's just a shortcut. It makes things much easier to do. I highly recommend using it. Now let's talk about some accessories for your camera, both software and hardware. The first thing I'll recommend is people get the Adobe Lightroom and Photoshop Creative Cloud deal. It's like, I think it's $10 a month in the US or $100 a year, depending on how you sign up. It includes both Lightroom and Photoshop. Lightroom is good for organizing your photos and doing light editing. Photoshop, of course, is more intensive. And if you're interested in those, be sure to check out my books on Lightroom and Photoshop. Now let's talk about lenses. You might have bought the Canon 6D with the Canon 24-105 f4, and that's a great lens, and it can be just fine for whatever it is you're doing. However, we did a comparison. You can check our YouTube channel for that review of that Canon 24-105 to a third-party lens, the Sigma 24-105, and I really like the Sigma 24-105 much better. That's the lens that I have mounted here. It's much brighter. It lets in much more light, even though they're both f4. It lets in almost twice as much light, which means your images will have half the noise in them. It's huge. The image stabilization also works much better, so your camera, your pictures are less likely to be shaky, and they're substantially sharper than they were with a Canon lens. Basically, almost every kit lens is kind of a little bit subpar, but the Sigma lens is a big step up from that if you like the focal length range. If you're looking for a really sharp lens or a lens that works well in low light, especially for things like events, like wedding receptions, which tend to happen after dark. Check out the ridiculously expensive Canon 24-70 f2.8. That's this lens here, and it's every wedding photographer has one of these. It's one of the sharpest zooms ever made. It's incredibly sharp. It's way sharper than even this one, and it will completely blow your kit lens away. The big downside to it is that it does not have image stabilization, so you have to be constantly like keeping your shutter speed up, which you have to do anyway for something like an event. But if you wanted to take landscape pictures handheld, the lack of image stabilization means some of your pictures, either your pictures will be a little bit shaky, or you'll have to use a higher ISO, which will introduce more noise. And in those situations, you might be happier with an image stabilized lens. You can use the links on the bottom here to buy any of these, or check the description down below where you can see links to all of these products. For video and landscapes where you need to be a little wider angle, I love the more reasonably priced Canon 16-35 f4. It has image stabilization in, so it's also good for shooting with slower shutter speeds. I also like to use it for events, but the reason I like it for video is I often like to shoot wide for video, and the image stabilization smooths out your video quite a bit. I really like that lens, and it's reasonably priced, under $1,000. If you want to go ultra wide for like serious landscape stuff, the Canon 11-24 f4 really can't be beat. No other manufacturer has like a zoom that's like 11 millimeters, this crazy wide angle. Like you might sometimes get your feet, your toes will be in the shot. You have to be careful how you use it. It's awesome. It's incredibly expensive, well over $2,000, but check it out at sdp.io/C11. The go-to portrait lens for wedding and portrait photographers for like the last 8 years since it was released is the Canon 70-200 f2.8L IS Mark II. It's one of our favorite portrait lenses. Check it out at this link here, sdp.io/C200. It's also a fantastic lens for sports. If you don't want to spend all that money, you can pick up the Tamron 70-200 f2.8. It's a third-party brand. It's sharp. It's very sharp, but it's not quite as good for portraits. Check our review on our YouTube channel for detailed information. If you get that and you're shooting sports or wildlife and you find that you're not quite getting all the reach you need, like you wish you could zoom in a little more, a teleconverter is a quick way to fix that. This is a teleconverter, and this one's pretty dusty, but basically you would end up taking the lens off and putting the teleconverter onto your body, and then you would attach the lens to the teleconverter like that. So it goes between the lens and the body and gives your lens a little bit more reach. Canon has two different models, the 1.4 times teleconverter, which would turn a 200 millimeter lens into 200 times 1.4, so a 280 millimeter lens, or the 2 times teleconverter, which would multiply everything times 2, bring it out to a 400 millimeter lens. They reduce sharpness a little bit, but it's really worth it, especially with this particular body. You'll get much more detail than you would if you were to just crop down. Check them out at these links here. If you get serious about sports, Canon has this awesome lens. The 200-400 millimeter f4 gives you much more reach, and it's very fast. It's also really, really pricey. You're going to be spending a lot of thousands of dollars on it. Check it out at that link there. For wildlife, there's a lens that I love, and it's old, but it's very sharp, it's lightweight, and it's super durable. It's the Canon 400 millimeter f5.6. You can see it attached to my 7D Mark II here. And it's just a gem. You can get it for less than $1,000 now, but I highly recommend you find a used one because they're cheaper used and they're built like a tank. So they seem to last forever. I've had that guy for like a good 6 years now, and I bought it used and it's still just performing like a champ. Check it out at the link there. By the way, if you do get serious about wildlife photography and you have the 6D, you might consider picking up a companion 7D Mark II. Because the 7D Mark II has what we call a crop sensor. It's a smaller sensor, which means it's taking the image just from the center of the frame. Basically, it's giving you an extra 60% zoom. So that 400 millimeter lens becomes like a 640 millimeter lens, but it still has like the same level of detail almost out of the middle of that lens, making it much better for wildlife where you almost always have to crop. Because like if you try to take a picture of a bird, you realize that they don't actually want to be as close as you want to be when you take the picture. Another great wildlife lens, this one includes image stabilization and it's a zoom, so it's a little more versatile, is the Canon 100-400 f/5.6 Mark II. I do not recommend the Mark I, it was never a very sharp lens, but the Mark II is very, very sharp. It's a couple of grand, so it's kind of expensive, but it's one of the lenses that we feel is definitely worth it. And at the high end, this is like a $13,000 lens, but the 600mm f4 just can't be beat for wildlife. I just thought I'd throw it out there. It's out of most people's price range. If you get serious about video, the most important thing about video isn't actually the video quality, but the sound. Sound is really important to video, and the on-camera mic is terrible. If you're recording a talking head situation like I am right now, I suggest getting a wireless mic, and the ones we're using are the Sennheiser EW100 G3s that you can pick up at this link. Actually, the ones I'm using are the G2, the older models. They're very similar. I recommend people see if they can find a used copy of the G2s because they're much less expensive than the G3s, but the G3s have a couple of minor advantages. For the most part, you wouldn't know the difference. Anyway, highly recommend those Sennheiser wireless mics. If you're thinking about slapping a UV filter, polarizing filter, ND filter on all of your lenses, you could be spending hundreds of dollars per lens that you own. I made a video where I demonstrate free post-processing techniques that can get most of the effects that you'll get out of those filters. sdp.io/nofilter to see that. No, it doesn't completely replace every use for those different filters, but if you're trying to save yourself a few bucks and you wouldn't mind spending a couple of seconds at a computer, you might prefer it to actually having to carry around those extra filters. If you get into making prints, here's a link to a video where we show you all the different printing providers, like 14 different printing providers in the US. Just to save you time, we liked MPix the best. So check out MPix. We don't have a relationship with them. They were the best. I'm going to show you 3 different tripods for 3 different purposes. The first is a cheap tripod. If you blew all your money on the 6D and you just want something that is functions, check out the Dolica tripod because it's 50 bucks and it's pretty good. sdp.io/tripod1. If you're a traveler and you want a tripod that you can fold up and put in your bag, I love my Manfrotto Be-Free tripod. You can pick one up at sdp.io/befree. Or if you're not traveling that much, but you want a good all-purpose tripod that is a little bit heavier, but also sturdier, check out this model of tripod. It's a Manfrotto tripod, but I'm not gonna try to read all these things. Instead, just go to sdp.io/mk190 to pick that up. Canon flashes are overpriced in my opinion. They do lots of good things, but I think they're way more expensive than they need to be. Fortunately, several manufacturers offer compatible flashes that do all the same things, and you could buy several of these for the price of one Canon flash, meaning that you could create more complex lighting setups and just generally get more value out of it. The flash that I'm recommending right now is the Godox V860 Mark II for Canon. You can pick it up at this link, sdp.io/v860c. It's not the cheapest flash there, but it supports wireless radio communications. So you could easily pick up a wireless transmitter and put it on your camera and then put the flash off camera to create much more powerful lighting effects. And that extra versatility is something that at some point in your photography career, you're really going to appreciate. If you want something more heavy duty than just a single little flash head, the same company, Godox, makes these awesome strobes. We're really happy with these strobes, the AD600BM, and they're sold under a couple of different names. Mine is sold under the Godox brand, but if you're in the United States, I recommend instead you go to this link, sdp.io/fpc, and you pick up the Adorama Flashpoint branded version of it. It's the exact same strobe I have here, but it's sold by Adorama and supported by Adorama. And the reason you want that is in case you have any questions or something, Adorama has much better support because I wrote to Godox about some stuff and they just never got back to me. So they make great hardware, but their support is maybe not great. But you can get Adorama US support without having to talk to them. That's it. One last plug for my book, Stunning Digital Photography, to teach you the art of photography, everything you need to know. But wait, first click subscribe because I will keep putting out free videos, hardware reviews, photography tutorials. Check out the rest of my channel too. We have like hundreds of hours of really useful videos that can get you started without spending a dime. Also give me a like, and if you have any questions, write a comment, share it with your friends. Okay, Stunning Digital Photography, a photography book that will teach you all the essentials for every major type of photography: weddings, landscapes, portraits, wildlife photography, night photography, macro photography, even underwater photography is covered in SDP. Check the reviews on Amazon. If you want, you can order it directly from us at sdp.io/store. Yes, we ship worldwide. The ebook is $10. The paperback is $20. It's so much cheaper than your camera. I promise you'll get so much more value out of it. If you get into Lightroom for organizing and editing your pics, or Photoshop for doing serious editing, I have books on both of those. And all these books include hours and hours of video. So if you don't like reading books, if you like learning from videos, apparently you do, you will love these because they're not dry books. Little sections of the book, you'll read it, but then you'll be able to watch a video that will reinforce that learning. So if you're a visual learner, you'll find that much easier. The last book here, my photography buying guide, has tons of detail about the differences between all those different flashes and what the different strobes are, and whether you really need image stabilization, and it can save you thousands and thousands of dollars when you're selecting your gear. So check that book out too. Thanks so much for watching. Share sdp.io/tutorials with your friends. Bye.